Sure.
Oh my gosh.
So we are going to talk about Jesus' leadership style and the way he faced conflict. But before we jump in, I just wanted to ask an opening question if anybody wants to share, like, to think about a leader of some sort, whether it be a parent, a teacher, a boss, that you admired quite a bit. And what was it in their approach to communication and conflict that you admired? Or what was it that you admired about their leadership style?
I'll go.
Go ahead.
So, as most of you know, I rejoined the staff when Father Justin came to St. Luke's, first just as a volunteer and then actually as a staff member. And what I appreciated about his leadership style was his willingness to engage in hard conversations in a way that didn't feel like I guess, to use the way Brene Brown, the leadership consultant that many of us are familiar with, the terminology that she uses is we could rumble, meaning we could argue, we could have a full-on argument about something that we may have had different opinions about, and then reach some kind of agreement or not. But the argument was, it was about a thing or a problem, a question, but it wasn't personal. Mm-hmm. The rumbling was tacit permission to kind of really speak your mind about something, being in a fully trusting relationship that no one's feelings are going to get hurt, and at the end of it, we're going to just say, okay, well, either we solved it or we didn't, but we had a good conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that. Just a willingness to be very, just let's talk. Let's really talk about what we all think, knowing that I trust you and you trust me, and we're not going to, hold it against each other when we're done.
Yeah, that's a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Anyone else?
The last supervisor I had when I worked for the state, well, he wasn't my direct super. He was over the whole section. I had to once or twice a month give him a report on numbers, which I knew when they were due, but I left work at 4:30. He came to my cube about 5 minutes before my time to leave and said he was getting ready to go into a meeting and he needed those stats right then. And I said, okay. I mean, it didn't bother me. I did working late. But I was very rushed when I figured out what the numbers were. And gave them to him. He went off to his meeting. 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and realized that when I was plugging in the numbers into the formula in the Excel file that I was using, I had not put it in correct. And what I gave him was wrong. I did not go back to sleep for the rest of the night. He got to work. I got in at 7 o'clock. He generally got there about 7:30. As soon as he got there, I went in and I said, David, I want to let you know those numbers I gave you yesterday were wrong. And I've been awake since 2 o'clock in the morning worrying about that. He looked at me. There's nothing about this job worth losing sleep over. That is the kind of leader he was.
That's awesome.
Really lived in the real world, so
Yeah.
I loved him to death. He was really great. So I was very privileged to know him. So
That's awesome. Sounds like he was very down to earth. Anyone else want to share?
I'll share. I had my prior boss like 5 years ago. I really respected her because, well, a lot of people did. She just really looked out for all her employees for their best, I think. She would do anything to support them. And she was like very personal. She remembered everything about you, about your kids, your birthday. And so, yeah, I just really, I worked with her for many years and she was just great. She always did everything, like I said, for her employees' best interest and called her my guardian angel. So.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Well, at the start of COVID, we all headed for home. There was a crew that continued to work all the way through COVID, but I didn't have to be part of that crew, so I started working from home. And my boss's concern was lack of work-life balance. One of the problems with taking the computer home and having it up and running is that it's easy for me, as Kim and I are closing the house down for the night, to glance at email and realize, oh, hey, the China team sent me an email. Well, 2 hours later, I go to bed and Kim's sound asleep and I'm up way too late. And my boss admonished me about not maintaining a healthy work-life balance as we were going through this period of working remotely. And I certainly appreciated that.
That's awesome. And that is a great segue, because we learned a lot about how Jesus managed his time, and that he still took time for prayer and for rest and for eating. And so maybe he was a good example of work-life balance. But let's start by reading from Luke tonight, chapter 20. And it's a little bit of a long reading, and it's got kind of 3 different stories in it. But he's going to hit on all 3. And so I want to read them all. So we can divide it up. We can have the first person read Luke 1 to 8. Who would like to do that?
Is that chapter 20?
20, yes.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
You mean start now, or do you want to designate the other part?
No, go ahead, and then we'll ask someone else.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. So Jesus' authority is questioned. On one of the days while he was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and the scribes with the elders confronted him. And they spoke, saying to him, "Tell us by what authority you are doing these things, or who is the one who gave you this authority?" Jesus answered and said to them, "I will also ask you a question, and you tell me. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men?" They reasoned among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why did you not believe him?' But if we say from men, all the people will stone us to death, for they are convinced that John was a prophet." So they answered that they did not know where it came from. And Jesus said to them, "Nor will I tell you by what authority I do these things."
Okay, so that's the first one, and he's going to talk about how Jesus often answered a question with a question. But let's read the next one, where right after this he tells a parable, and this is an interesting one. So this would be 9 to 18.
I'll do that.
Okay.
And he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and let it out to tenants and went into another country for a while. When the time came, he sent a servant to the tenants so that they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent another servant, but they also beat and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent yet a third. This one also they wounded and cast out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they said to themselves, "This is the heir. Let us kill him so that the inheritance may be ours." And they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they heard this, they said, "Surely not." But he looked directly at them and said, "What then is this that is written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him."
Okay, so that's, again, this is all discussion he's having with the scribes, remember? So that's where he's looking at them as he's telling that parable, and it'll explain it in the next section. So then it's just 19 to 26. Who wants to read that? Go ahead, Nancy.
All right, this is the New Living Translation. The teachers of religious law and the leading priests wanted to arrest Jesus immediately because they realized he was telling the story against them. They were the wicked farmers. They were afraid of the people's reaction. Watching for their opportunity, the leaders sent spies pretending to be honest men. They tried to get Jesus to say something that could be reported to the Roman governor so he would arrest Jesus. "Teacher," they said, "we know that you speak and teach what is right and are not influenced by what others think. You teach the way of God truthfully. Now, tell us, is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" He saw through their trickery and said, "Show me a Roman coin whose picture and title are stamped on it." "Caesar's," they replied. "Well then," he said, "give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God." So they failed to trap him by what he said in front of the people. Instead, they were amazed by his answer and they became silent.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so just, did you guys catch it in that last section, why the leaders were trying to arrest him?
Yeah, they were mad about the parable that was about them.
Exactly. So he was kind of disrespecting their authority. So anyway, now let's watch the video, and he's got some great points that he makes, and then we'll have some more discussion. Oh, I should share my screen, huh? That would help. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Come on, open up.
In Luke chapter 20, verses 1 through 8, we find Jesus again doing what he does so well, teaching and preaching. And he's teaching in the temple, which is, if you recall, his Father's house. And so it's his house too. In this particular passage, we're not quite sure what Jesus is teaching and preaching about. Luke doesn't tell us anything about the content being sagaciously delivered by this one who will soon save the world from sin. But because we have the entire gospel narrative at our fingertips, we can be assured that Jesus is teaching and preaching in the temple with the same consistency and content as what he was delivering to the people in the countryside. So likely we can expect Jesus talking about the kingdom of God, or the importance of loving your neighbor, or the significance of prayer, or the good news that he has come so that people might have life and have it abundantly. I think it's safe to say that on this particular Tuesday in the temple courts, Jesus is, in some form or fashion, sharing the gospel. And yet, As the word of God comes out of the mouth of Jesus, the word of God, as John reminds us, there are some in the area who are so self-absorbed and so saturated with religion that they fail to hear about how they can grow in relationship with God. While Jesus is busy teaching and preaching, the religious leaders are busy demeaning and scheming. They're not at all, with the exception of Nicodemus, they're not at all open to anything Jesus is saying. In fact, they don't seem to even care to understand one iota of Jesus' instruction, which just goes to show you, no matter how good of hearing some people have, the Gospels will still sometimes fall on deaf ears. These are educated men, trained theologians, experts in the law who are spiritually deaf. They're supposed to be philosophically engaging the mysteries of the ages, of time and space. They're supposed to be seeking out wisdom and become proponents and providers and proclaimers of truth. And yet they don't even try, they don't even attempt to ponder the profundities from Jesus, who is the essence of truth. Instead of listening for truth, they are figuring out how to trap Jesus, not realizing that trying to trap Jesus is like trying to harness the sun. So they wait for just the right moment to spring the trap. Or maybe they simply interrupt Jesus mid-sentence. That sort of fits their profile better. After all, in the words of Plato, wise men speak because they have something to say, fools speak because they have to say something. Whatever the case may be, while the most significant teacher in all of existence is dropping divine nuggets of truth upon the open-minded in the temple courts, these professional fools, after scheming for who knows how long just to formulate a cohesive collective thought, hope that now, somehow, some way, they might be able to disrupt Jesus' train of thought and corner him. So they question Jesus' authority by asking him who gave him the right to do and say the things he is doing and teaching. Now, I love so many things about Jesus, so many things. And one of the best things I love about Jesus is that he never responds to the ridiculous. Read the Gospels and you'll see this is so true. He never responds to any mockery, snarky comments, or questions that aren't asked out of a pure motive and a deep desire for truth. Of course, we know the answer to this question he has asked. It's not like it's a complicated question. Jesus teaches and preaches and heals and raises the dead by his own authority. He is the Son of David and the Son of God, who just happens to be in this moment standing in his house. The answer is obvious, isn't it? So why doesn't Jesus just answer the question? We can only speculate. Maybe he didn't want to shift the focus from the content of his teaching to the teacher, because it would definitely be a conversation stopper. Coming out at this moment and claiming all authority over heaven and earth would probably lead him straight to the cross, which means missing out on sharing a few more important teaching points, and more importantly, it would mean missing out on eating a Passover meal with his disciples and having the opportunity to show them how he will become the Passover lamb and how a new covenant will be formed. Out of all the possible reasons why Jesus doesn't just answer their question, I like that reason the best. In any case, Jesus isn't into playing rhetorical games with these idiots. And he especially isn't about to be backed into a corner and be forced to answer a question that he obviously doesn't want to answer for some divine reason. So Jesus, in his perfect wisdom, sidesteps their question with a question and traps the trappers. Like the day before, he turns the tables upside down once again, metaphorically speaking, this time. And of course, these ignoramuses were silenced. And as Jesus moves right on teaching the people without skipping a beat, these members of the religious elite fail to learn that as the Son of God, Jesus doesn't owe anyone an explanation for anything he does, and yet he consistently offers truth out of love. Of course, read the next few passages of Luke and you'll continue to see the revolutionary nature of Jesus' teaching. Right after he thwarted a religious trap, Jesus begins stirring the pot once again, but this time by telling the parable of the tenants. Now, this is amazing. This man has no fear, because in this parable, he uses reality to create a parallel situation, which makes the teachers of the law and chief priests so upset to the point they're actively looking for a way to arrest Jesus, because they're at least smart enough at this point to understand he's talking about them. But since they can't seem to nail down Jesus for anything he's currently saying about religion, they send spies to incite him to speak.
I want to stop there before we go to the end. So there were a couple of things. Well, before we get to the one that somebody was giggling about, there was the one that I thought was interesting is trying to trap Jesus is like harnessing the sun, trying to harness the sun. Thought that was a fun analogy. And then he's basically saying he never responds to the ridiculous, right? Who was giggling about that?
I probably was.
Okay, that was fun.
Yeah. He doesn't respond. I think what made me giggle in particular was our speaker's use of the word snarky.
Yes.
That he couldn't be baited. He could not be baited by people being rude or insolent or snarky. And he didn't reply in those ways. He was just such an adult about everything. It's so refreshing.
So one of the questions is, how would you evaluate Jesus's communication or conflict resolution when his authority was questioned? And how might you have responded?
What's the second half of that question?
How might you have responded?
Well, as a parent, I've become very versed at because I said so.
That's exactly what I thought. In fact, one of my kids gave me a T-shirt that said, because I'm the mommy, that's why.
It just reminds me of when you say that of when our son was 3, he asked me something and I said, we'll see. And he said, Mommy, we'll see means never.
Well, I think like when I know though personally, my initial reaction when I'm put on the spot like that is to get defensive. And Jesus doesn't, obviously he's the Son of God, but he you said, Nancy, he was adult about it, but he controls his impulse. And maybe Jesus didn't have these impulses, but it is really hard for me to take a step back and not come at it from a point of non-defensiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Because Jesus could have said, well, he could have said, I'm the Son of God, that's why.
Because I'm the Son of God. That's why. The T-shirt. Perfect T-shirt.
Because I said so.
Also that.
Jesus very rarely answered a question.
Right.
Most
the question.
responses were questions that made you think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the point, really, is to bring it back into our lap and make us think about what we're questioning and why.
Yeah, good point.
I've never liked that quality. I've always wanted hard answers.
Yes.
So what are your reactions to? The speaker said he thinks the reason that Jesus didn't engage was because he didn't want to go straight to the cross. He had more to teach, and he wanted to celebrate the Passover dinner and bring in the new covenant and the Eucharist. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, he knows how hard their hearts are. So maybe he just wants to save that energy for later and not play their game. They're try to.
That's the way I see it too. I mean, I think he refuses to answer questions because the questions are not sincerely posed, and he's not going to play their game for them.
Yeah,
I
I remember,
also think his work wasn't done.
Yeah.
I remember years ago reading an autobiography of somebody who was a notable person who said when he was attacked, he never responded, because when you're attacked unfairly, there is no answer you can give that's going to satisfy the person, and you just kind of demean yourself by trying to answer, and you're not going to convince anybody. And I guess I had never thought about. I was really impressed with that guy's thinking, and it just reminds me that in that way he and Jesus were kind of alike. That, I mean, there was nothing he could have said that was going to convince them that he was speaking correctly. I mean, they were clearly out to try to trick him and get him. And
Yeah,
it was a, you know, it was a catch-22.
Yeah, it
And
was.
there are other points in Jesus' life where he answers very forthrightly. One of the readings in this week's lectionary, the gospel reading, is the story of the Samaritan woman. And when she asks, "Are you the Messiah?" he says, "Yes, I am."
It's true.
It's not a question, you know. He's not afraid of answering honestly when the question is sincerely posed, and the answer is going to be welcome.
Yeah, great point.
A beautiful nuance to notice. If the
Yeah.
question is sincerely posed.
He answers it. Well, that is a great segue to the last part. A great segue. So let me share. Here's my little. I think this ribbon down here is blocking me from starting the video. Let me do this. Oh, that's nice. Sorry about that, you guys.
Speak out against the government. The unfolding exchange in Luke 20, verses 20 through 26 is one of my favorites. A religious spy approaches Jesus and tries to butter him up a bit. This little mole, acting like he really is after the truth, acknowledges Jesus' great teaching as the way of God and how Jesus' teaching is always in accordance with the truth. Of course, this little praise fest is disingenuous and ineffective. As if Jesus is all of a sudden going to lose his inherent humility, Paul describes in Philippians 2, and then be filled with hubris, with pride. Jesus is secure in who he is. He isn't going to get a big head. So with humility and wisdom, Jesus sees through their duplicity, and because, again, he doesn't respond to the ridiculous mockery or to questions asked out of an impure motive, Jesus fields this potentially very controversial question and responds with another question. He takes a Roman coin, a denarius, holds this equivalent of a day's wages in his hand, lifts it up in the air and says, "Whose portrait and inscription are on it?" Of course, the answer is Caesar's. So Jesus responds, "Then give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what is God's." Now talk about a revolutionary statement. Wow. Many interpreters think Jesus' answer here is safe, that it is PC. No, this isn't a safe answer at all. It's a politically hazardous one if the right people catch wind of what Jesus is really saying. This simple answer is so far from being politically correct. We heard the answer whose portrait is on the coin, but we didn't catch the answer to whose inscription is on that same coin. But everyone there already knew what the answer was, what the inscription says. And because of modern archaeology, we know what the inscription on this Roman coin says. Translated from Latin into English, it reads, "Tiberius Caesar, son of the god Augustus." So when Jesus says, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what is God's," Jesus isn't just mildly settling some political issue regarding the justification of paying taxes. No, with his hand held high, Jesus is boldly claiming this absolute truth: Caesar is not God. And after this revolutionary statement, the religious leaders became silent. I mean, what are they going to say? They know the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." What can they say? It might seem like Jesus' answer here is a little tongue-in-cheek, but let's be clear about something. Based upon every single encounter Jesus has had up to this day and will have from this moment forward, it's clear that Jesus fears no one. He's not afraid of the religious establishment, nor is he fearful of the figurehead of the world's most powerful empire. And why is Jesus not afraid of the Romans or the religious elite? Because even the demons see Jesus and shudder, as the Bible says. This is the Son of God we're talking about. He is one with the Father. Nature obeys him. Death responds to him when he calls people back to life. Disease is a non-issue when his hand touches another person who's sick. Jesus answers to no one but God the Father, which means no diabolical, delusional, despotic dictators or their minions are going to prevent Jesus from saying exactly what he wants to say when he wants to say it, or do whatever he wants to do when he wants to do it. And after yet another failed attempt to trap Jesus, I'm reminded of these words from 1 Corinthians 1:25. For the foolishness of God, if there really is such a thing, for the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. The mind of Christ is the mind of God. How dare these mortals think they can outthink Jesus? Now, 3 days from this day, it might appear like the Romans and the religious establishment win their war against this man. But in all actuality, it's on the cross when the revolution of love really overtakes this world. Because it's on the cross when the real Son of God is lifted up. And it's what Jesus is doing on the cross in that moment that will change the course of human existence forever.
Okay. So what did you think about, when about his interpretation of what Jesus's answer to the coin? Give to Caesar what is Caesar, give to God what is God's. Had anybody ever heard that before?
Well, we've certainly heard that story, but I did not realize the importance of the inscription.
That's what was new to me, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was right. I agree, David. And Maria, I didn't know what was actually on the coin in Latin, and the translation being what it is. So there was no missing the point that Jesus was actually making, and there was no rebuttal of that by the teachers of the law at that point.
Yeah. Was that the first time, or was anybody else heard that interpretation before? That's what Jesus was actually saying?
I hadn't.
Well, Paul, you usually come forward and have a different perspective on some of these things. I was waiting for you to
Okay.
I was like, come on, Paul.
In a desperate effort not to disappoint you, I will simply say, I don't think we have a clue what coin was being held up. There are lots of coins in circulation. It could have been a coin issued by Augustus himself. I mean, it's a very clever argument he's making there, but I'm too much of a historian to have confidence that he's right about it. I like the story. It's a great story. It's not story. The lesson of rend under Caesar is so powerful on the face of it that I'm comfortable with leaving it right there and not trying to overthink it, I guess is what I want to say.
Well, that whole statement was a real trap, because they were looking for him to be the Jewish Messiah and overthrow the Roman Empire and free the country and set up his own kingship. And of course, what the Jewish hierarchy was all about was, if we get him to say something against the Roman Empire, well, then we can go and tell the Romans, hey, you've got a problem here, take care of them.
Yeah.
So he managed to neatly dodge that, come up with the, hey, this is his coin, give it back to him. But of course, it was a trap. They were looking for him to say, no, we're going to throw out the Romans. And of course, if he had done that, then the Romans would have come hunting him right then, right there.
And the other thing about it is it's a double trap, because they they think if he supports paid the taxes, he will disappoint many of his followers. And so he manages to come up with a way that, I don't know, splits the difference, I guess what I'd say.
Yeah, so is your modern day interpretation of that, Paul, to say like we pay taxes and we give, to worthy causes? Like we pay to the government what's due the government and then donate? Is that what is it when you say when you say that's what it means just on its own, Paul?
I'm not certain I understand. If you're asking, I don't quite understand the
What do you
question.
mean by that? What does the comment "rend under Caesar" mean for you when you said that enough is very strong for me?
Well, just that he's managed to, as David said, he's managed to avoid the trap,
Okay.
and he's managed to avoid both traps, and he's made it clear that he's not, the revolution he represents is not merely resistance to Rome.
Yeah.
That's what I take it to.
I also had the feeling that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were really not too interested in getting rid of the Romans because they had a lot of power and prestige in their position because they were keeping the Jewish people kind of in check. And the Romans kind of placated them so that they would keep the Jewish people. So I don't know that the Pharisees and Sadducees were really, especially the Pharisees, they weren't really interested in getting rid of the Romans, I don't think.
I agree.
Interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense that they weren't, because you know what, they were going to be, the Jews were always under rule by someone. So, I mean, yeah, maybe the Romans were the least, the devil they knew.
Well, and one thing too, that my impression is that part of how the Romans were able to have such a large empire was that they, not just with the Jews, but with the peoples that they conquered, that they gave them within certain parameters a lot of autonomy. So that as opposed to trying to, dictate every single little thing, that they in a sense co-opted people. And, and Paul was pleased that he was a citizen of the Roman Empire. Now, whether, there's discussion about that, whether or not he really was or not, but I mean, that's one of the things that he says. So that there was, and there was, to a great extent, law and order. I mean, Paul could travel. I mean, eventually he got imprisoned and killed. So, but it was, it's not like that the Jews were necessarily treated all that differently from other people that the Romans had conquered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the Romans needed the taxes that the Jews had to pay. I mean, in the areas that they conquered, they needed the citizens to continue to produce food and goods and pay those taxes.
So that this discussion reminds me, and again, it's one interpretation of what happened in scripture, but on the chosen, before Matthew starts following Jesus, he is a tax collector, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it shows that he is protected by the Romans. Like he is escorted from his home to his tax office and very much taken care of by the Romans. So interesting. I like, one thing I did want to mention was I like kind of the picture he painted in the beginning of where Jesus is teaching in the temple and we don't know what he's saying. And you have the scribes and the religious leaders over here and they're trying to figure out how to trap him. And it's kind of fun to imagine what that kind of looked like, that here's them preaching and over here they're arguing amongst themselves, trying to think of what to say to him. And then they walk up and they ask him a question and he gives them a question back and they all look at each other and they have to walk away and talk about it. I mean, just it's a kind of an interesting way to think about it. But let's move on to this question. What might we learn from Jesus' response in both passages when dealing with difficult questions asked of us?
Ask a question when asked a difficult question.
Why do you want to know?
What do you think about that?
But there is actually, so what I was thinking, Carol, was like if I'm asked a question that sparks a negative reaction in me, to not react immediately and stop and think. And it actually, when something like that happens, it's not an evasive technique to ask, like, so help me understand why you're asking this, or something like that. And I never do that. Never smart enough to do that, to really understand what the person is getting at. And that, to me, that was the learning, is just stop and try to understand the intent. If it sparks a negative reaction, like what's intended here? Maybe I need clarification.
Well, and it also gives you, to kind of de-escalate.
Mhm.
Well, what I think about when I think of these responses is not answering the question is an art form. And I'm a big fan of the Sunday morning talk shows where politicians come on. But the one thing you can be quite confident on is no matter what the question, the politician is not going to answer it. He's going to go ahead and say what he came to say. I think what's amazing about these three examples of Jesus is that he doesn't avoid the question. He just doesn't address it directly. The questions are always posed in a way that they think will compel an answer. And Jesus comes up with a way of answering the question that is honestly responsive, but doesn't fall into whatever trap has been laid by the question. It's masterful.
Might be difficult to come up with a smart answer like that.
Yeah, I agree. Very few people can do it well.
He did have the advantage of knowing what they were getting ready to ask to begin with.
Well, and the wisdom of God.
So that's what I meant. He knew what was in their heart. And so he was not about to answer what they wanted.
Yeah, and that's where it came up, that if there's one thing I can take away from this to pray about, is like, when that situation comes, don't react immediately, stop and think about it. And then you not necessarily to avoid the question, but that was kind of what I was thinking, is stop and think about, why did they ask that? Do I need more information?
Yeah, in connection with that, it reminds me of, I remember reading about how do you talk to somebody who is really, 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 really suspicious of any of the vaccines in COVID. And one of the suggestions of something that I was reading was saying, talk to somebody about what their concerns are, and ask them, their views. Don't just say something like, "Are you kidding? Are you an idiot? You don't want to have a shot to save your life." I do remember reading about a woman whose husband died from COVID, and she said, I really feel bad, because she said, I encouraged him not to get a shot. And she said, and I'm okay, and he died. So in that, I was just thinking it would have been nice if she and her husband could have talked to somebody who had a better approach. But it does remind me of that kind of tension in our world right now, that trying to convince somebody of something that they, the best way to try to convince somebody of something is not to not to tell them that they're stupid and that you know it.
And in
Really?
reality, you don't know why they're reacting like they are. I mean, they may have experiences that were very negative in the past, other than just not wanting to get the.
Right.
So, I mean, that's true in all situations, I think. People have to draw from their own experiences as to how they're reacting.
Right.
So my little cartoon about you may be right, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong. You haven't seen life from my perspective.
Mhm.
You both can be right. I know that's really hard to understand, but I really believe that everybody is right in their own mind and what they're thinking and what they're reacting to. So.
But even if you absolutely knew you were right, it doesn't always gain you anything to press that point. You gotta think what you're gonna, and Jesus was well aware of what he was or was not gonna gain from, I mean, he could have stood there and said, I'm sorry, you're absolutely wrong, and this is why. You're just wrong, you know, and he might have been right with that, but what would he have gained from it?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that the theme that keeps coming out at me in nuggets of what you guys are saying is when we're approaching a difficult conversation, maybe spend some time in prayer asking Jesus, the Holy Spirit, to give us the words. And go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and be patient for that.
Yeah, that's true too. I always add to my prayers, make it abundantly clear so that I know for sure. Yeah, hit me over the head. I'm not good with subtlety, God.
I'm gonna borrow that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us want kind of twist that prayer a little bit to make it abundantly clear to whoever it is that we're arguing with. Right.
Dear Jesus, show me the other ways.
I'm not sure that's gonna work.
That's not the right prayer.
Sometimes we're tempted though.
Yeah. Well, and all too often, as you can see from the way our society goes, everybody at any given moment is ready for an argument and so certain that their position is right on any subject. We've kind of lost the ability to respond in the manner Jesus did and not attack back.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Just respect the other person's opinion. That's hard to do. I mean, their opinion may be wrong, but they are entitled to it as you said. But as each one of us would like our opinion to be respected also. So.
And I think I totally agree with what you guys are saying too. And one of the things like when I found this is when I hit a turning point and I realized I just needed to take a different approach when my husband and daughter voted for Trump and my daughter and I voted for Clinton. I guess it was Hillary then. And it was such a divisive thing that I was just like, I am not going to have this discussion in my house because it's too divisive. And that's not one that anybody's ever going to change. And so there's no reason to talk about it and not to bring that divisiveness into our family. So that's what we can each do too, is create that safe space in our own families.
Well, this was, of everything that I heard Father Justin say, the thing that sticks with me the most because he preached it a lot, was that we all need to learn to love each other in disagreement.
I love
That's
that.
it. Because, he was with us during a very divisive political time. He was with us when all the debates had begun around how to handle COVID and whether or not we should mask and whether or not vaccines were safe and all of these things that were creating so much fear, anger, polarization. And that's really the only way through it.
Yeah.
Because we are going to disagree. I will have a different opinion than you, probably. Do you like vanilla or chocolate? Do you vote Republican or Democrat? Are you pro-life or pro-choice? We're all going to be different in our opinions. And whether I believe that your opinion is well-informed or not, I still owe it to you as a fellow child of God to try to love you, even though we disagree. And I think St. Luke's does a pretty good job of that. I really do think our congregation does a pretty good job of that.
I agree.
I know that there are people with opinions about all the things across the spectrum. But we come together, we care for each other, we worship together, we try to learn, we try to love each other. And I mean, there are people I vehemently disagree with at St. Luke's about certain things, and I couldn't love them more deeply than if they were my own family. Like, because I just do. And I think it's been very humbling for me to get to know some of these people on a very deep and personal level, who on the surface of it, I would think, I could never be friends with them. Well, I mean, that's the complete opposite of reality. I love them. I think they like me. But anyway, it's been a good lesson. And I don't think I'd have learned it outside of church.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. And Nancy, it's because God loves each and every one of us the same, regardless of what we think, what we do, or anything. It's an unconditional love that we receive from God. And I think that's what he expects from us. So you're right. We have a very, very diverse and loving family at St. Luke.
Yes.
But that kind of a response is what the rest of the world needs to see from us. Because to learn that there's a better way of dealing with it. And if we don't show that when we're out in the world, then we're missing out on something we should be doing as followers of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Especially during Lent.
What was that?
I said, especially during Lent.
Yes, and I was going to segue that as we go into prayers, taking that perspective into our workplaces, and also as we're coming up to Easter, where we're all going to get together with extended families, taking it into that event as well. So
that is the reason that at family gatherings, we do not talk about religion.
Or politics.
That's right. Okay, so we're still praying for Andy, right, Robin? Any update?
Stop your recording.